Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. We are again doing a solo episode, so I want to thank you for bearing with me. There is no other insightful guest to hide behind. I'm going to have to do it. But yeah, the last one I did was on Puerto Rico, and I don't even know if I'm saying it right. Every time I say it, especially because I was recording the season on it, I was like, do I really want to say I feel like I should have learned how to say it properly by now. But let me try. Puerto Rico. No, that's probably also failing. Okay, I'm just going to say Puerto Rico right now, but just know it pains me internally deeply every time I call it that. I want to say it right. I will take the intention to go and learn how to say it right. The next time you hear me say it, I'm going to say it right. But that was the last episode that I had recorded alone. And I had this phenomenal experience recently. And I was like, I have to record about this because I think there's so many implications of this form of living on learning. So let's get to it. So there is a organization called WOOF, and it stands for World Organization of Organic Farming. And pretty much you go on there. I learned this from a lot of travelers, but you go onto the website, you create an account. It costs $40 to make an account, and a bunch of farmers will then reach out to you, or you can reach out to them. Around the world, there's a hot hub in Brazil and Japan, and you basically then work on their land it depends, you kind of create a deal with them, but oftentimes it's 5 hours a day, 25 hours a week. You can kind of split it up however you'd like, and then they pay for housing and food. And so a lot of people have found it to be a phenomenal way to travel and experience the world while also having a relative safety net where you can leave the city in a lot of places, and you no longer have to be like, well, I don't really know anyone here. What am I supposed to do? So farming has been something that I've always been fascinated by and something that I wanted to understand. I wanted to start with the fear that comes with the types of education systems that we have today. So when I think about living in a city, I'm sometimes deeply overwhelmed with how little I know how any of it works, starting from transportation to construction. Like, how is a house even built? And then you can go into farming. How does a food actually get to the grocery store? Who makes it? How is it processed? How does it survive across these long drives to get to where it does? How do we get water? Where does my water come from? Or what happens to my waste when I flush the toilet? Or what happens to the trash when I throw it in these garbage cans? The beauty of complex systems is that it makes it so you no longer have to think about it. Your thinking can go elsewhere. And that's the only way a society can continue to become more and more complex. Because if everyone was, constantly worrying about every single one of these details, I think it would become hard to allow your brain to navigate to other things. But there's a downside of this, which is that you become so disconnected with the world around you. At any moment it stops working, all of a sudden chaos will ensue. If the plumbing system stops working, I feel like there's such a few amount of people, especially in these large cities, who actually know how it works or how to fix it, that it would heavily depend on those people to make it work. So what ends up happening when you build these really large systems where you no longer have to really know how it fundamentally functions is, I think, this level of anxiety. And it's a subtle anxiety. I don't think it's something that you have to even be able to wake up and address and be like, I know why I'm anxious. It's because of this. But I think the more and more that you don't know, and it works with, how does my car work? How does my refrigerator work? How does my microwave work? The list runs on forever and ever. I think these anxieties slowly build up, and it just sits there somewhere in your head. And every time you're actually confronted with your tire, popping, and all of a sudden you don't know how to change your tire, that's when it really kind of comes out. And then it comes, it resides again silently in the back for the rest of your days when you're not thinking about it. But it's there. So I was always interested by understanding these systems. I remember when I was in high school, for a field trip, we had gone to the local sewage system to actually learn about how it works. That was a phenomenal experience. And since then, I've always been like, I want to do more of that. And so a big part of that has always been interested in understanding how food gets from a farm to our dinner table. Like, how does it actually go through that process? What does it take to raise crops and cattle and all these things? And what is that process? So I thought I would give woofing a shot. And I did my first woofing experience 2 hours north of the bay near Eureka in California. And I'm really excited to report back on what I learned. So let's get into it. So for context, to kind of give the landscape of the place that I stayed, it was in the mountains. It was a farm area in the mountains, and everyone was living off-grid. And so I learned a little bit about what off-grid meant, but that basically meant that they were not connected to the electric circuit. Did I even say that right? I thought it was right, but once I said it out loud, I don't think electric circuit is, it's electric grid. There it is, boom, not circuit, grid. They're not connected to the electric grid. They store and filter their own water. And luckily I had T-Mobile, so there was a little bit of service that I was able to still teach and do all my things. But most of the other AT&T and Verizon, and this is not an ad for T-Mobile, but AT&T and Verizon don't work up there. And so, they store and create their own energy, and it was amazing. But as off the grid living can be, they live out of a school bus, the family that I stayed with, amazing school bus. So it was really big. I'm shocked how they got it up there. You had to take these really narrow roads up the mountain to get there. And I ended up staying in an Airstream, which is these giant silver, kind of like RVs, but they're huge. And it had a bed in it, a bathroom, and a little place to cook. And I also had like a couch and a small table. So it was quite nice, actually. And I stayed there for 10 days. And man, I mean, something that's beautiful, I think, even as you are forced to reflect in a moment when you have a podcast like this, or just when you have to speak on something, is you have these memories just flow through your mind so quickly. I just got hit with like 1,000 memories all in 1 second. And it's like, I can't believe how different some people can lead their lives from others. I remember the first 3 days I was there, I was just telling everyone that. I was like, I can't believe that I grew up 2 hours away from this and lived a completely different life. So one of the main the biggest topic or theme that came from this experience is perspective. So I wanted to give an example of perspective and connect it back to education and how they all tie in together. So we were playing a game of Pictionary. First of all, it was a really old Pictionary. I assume it was made in the 90s or 80s, because a lot of the words were things that I hadn't known, and there were a lot of phrases that I was like, never heard that. Is there a word like lit or something in there? For 2010 slang. But when we were playing, one thing that I noticed is how different our understanding and interpretation of the world is. I think Pictionary and Taboo, because those games are so quick, you can really tell how different people have experienced the world by socioeconomic status, by race, by gender, and so on and so forth. It highlights how different people live. So one of the words I think was ribbon. And I was time crunch. I couldn't think about what to do for ribbon. So I think it was bow or ribbon. I think it might have been bow. So I drew a car. I was thinking cutting a bow off like a new, when you're opening up a new restaurant or something, but I didn't know how to do that. So I thought of a car. When you gift someone a car, sometimes people put a bow on it. And that was actually a round that lasted quite some time. And eventually everyone was like, what were you trying to draw? And, I was just explaining it's a new car, and everybody just we had a good laugh, because everyone was like, I have never seen that except on TV, probably when I was 10 years old. And then the next round, the word that had got picked was willow. And I've never seen a willow tree. And so they tried to draw it. And I was like, I have no idea what a willow tree really looks like. But what I'm trying to say is that our worlds and the things that we've been through were so different that when we're trying to explain something to each other, even though we both live in the same country, speak the same language, we had difficulty being able to do that. But what does this actually mean? So when it comes to education, one of, I think, the biggest failings is our failure to actually address how profound the differences between us are. It's not to say, hey, I'm different than you, therefore I'm better than you. But it's to say, we are really different. So when we talk about college or doing well in school, we need to understand that we're really talking about two different things. I wanted to record an episode on this earlier, but I had gone to a family friend's graduation, and it was a high school graduation, and the valedictorians were speaking. And something they had said was, class of 2024, I want to let you guys all know we have so many options and pathways in front of us. You can go to community college, you can go to university, you can go to college, and you can even join the military. And that's how she kind of presented her speech of, you have so many options. But what does it mean? Like, when I heard that, I was just so shocked. Because this is someone who's a valedictorian. And what does valedictorian mean? In an education system, this is our golden child. Like, this is the person who really embodied all the values and intellect that we like prioritize. And this person has it all. But when someone says something that close-minded, what does it mean? It means that I have a particular view of the world, which is that college is a thing that everyone does, and people care a lot about education in this particular context, exactly like this, going to college, getting a job, so on and so forth. And because I experience that and my few friends do, everyone here must. The 500 people in the graduating class must be thinking about the same things. But it's like, what about all the students who aren't thinking about that? Not because they're not thinking about college because they can't go or whatever, but what if like their life situation, circumstances are just so different that is not something that they're like particularly thinking about? And so this is perspective. But what ends up happening, and I think Bell Hooks talks a lot about this, where learning can be so disembodied that you're no longer a student where your body, who you are in your body matters. It is just your mind, which is this abstract thing that just like floats around and you just pick up information and you learn it. But you as a human, the context in which you learn doesn't matter. And that's what we were taught, right? When do we actually ever get to talk about our lives in classes, right? Like, I went to public schooling for 12 years. I don't think a single time anyone was ever asked, share us about your life. In the first day of school, you get to kind of be like, tell us something you did fun over summer, which is a great start. That's something to humanizing you as a person. But what ends up happening when you actually give someone perspective, when you actually allow someone to be in their body? What you end up realizing is, dang, every person here has so much to offer, because they can offer you a lens into an understanding that you will never have. I will never understand what it means like to be a woman. So I have to ask, and I still won't understand, but at the very least I can hear that perspective. And the list goes on and on and on. I mean, that's just one, right? I won't understand what it means to have autism. I can't just like intellectualize about it and read books. Sometimes you have to actually ask the people who are in that group or who have that experience to speak on it. So I think perspective is a really, really important thing when it comes to education, and one of the biggest failures that I've noticed. So coming back to the farm, I think from day one, what we all had to confront with, there was another two people who had come as well. We all had to sit there and be like, whoa, we come from very different worlds. Let us actually talk about it and kind of understand how our experiences overlap and how they differ. And what I think one of the most difficult parts about a perspective-minded education is that the teacher needs to lose control. So long as everyone is a mind, you no longer have to humanize everyone. You can kind of just feel like you are the instruction giver, and you're like, everyone, learn this stuff. All your homes must be the same as what I imagine it to be. Therefore, it's like easy for me to kind of just abstract 30 people and just say something at everyone, right? Because if you were to actually individualize 30 people, it would take a lifetime to understand the context for each student. That's a lot, and it takes a lot of effort. And it also makes you have to humanize every single person. So you can no longer just be like, oh, you didn't do your homework, you're a bad person. Oh, you didn't do well on this test, you're just dumb. You have to actually understand the context behind which someone even comes to school. And that I think what ends up happening is you end up realizing that you have to look at them eye to eye. As the adult, you no longer can look at someone as your inferior, as like you're younger than me, you don't know much about the world. You have to look at someone who might be 30 years younger than you and still be like, wow, you also have such a profound understanding of the world around you, I need to take you seriously and look at you eye to eye. And so I think anytime your brain makes you realize, oh man, people lead different lives, it does something that opens you up to true learning. And so the first 3 days, when I was there, I think that was the first thing we all had experienced. I don't think they had often been around, tech bros from the Bay, who went to grad school and then came to like farms and experienced the city life. And they hadn't met many people who had left the country and had gone to India. And so whatever. And I had never met anyone who lived off the grid and did the things that they did and thought about the things that they did and collected their own energy and water and learned how to, do all these complex things and eat their own food. And so it gives you another dimension to which you can now understand the world. So continuing from perspective, the next thing that I want to talk about is the embodiment of knowledge. So season 5 of the Reeducated podcast is all going to be, oh man, that's crazy. I'm just realizing by the time this drops, season 5 would have already been published. But season 5 was all about indigenous approaches to learning. And a lot of what people were saying was about the embodied nature of knowledge, not something that's just in your mind, but something that's in your body. And this is something that I really understood living on this farm. So there were 3 kids there, 6, 9, and 5, I believe. And I was shocked how much they knew about what a rattlesnake was, what berries you can eat, how ripe is every single little fruit, when will it become ripe, when can you eat it, what do you need to do. I saw a 5-year-old cutting onions and stuff so well. He was like de-seeding, unseeding, de-seeding, whatever you call it, squash, and he was so capable of. And then the 9-year-old was so intelligent at learning how to and teaching me about the animals that lived there, what to do when the dog was hungry. They had 9 dogs, a bunch of chicken and cows and goats and sheep. And it was fascinating to see how much they knew, not because they read it out of some book somewhere, but because they had to actually use it in their day-to-day, right? Like, what is the filter? I mean, I keep bringing up the filtration process because that was so cool to me, but to actually learn about filtration and understand how it works, what is in rainwater, what happens to water when it stagnates, and then why do you need to actually filter it out? Maybe a lot of people know this, but to me, I didn't know any of that. And so that was I was like, this shows, and to them, it wasn't just like, oh, I got to read the science book and answer a test. It was like, I need to learn how to filter water, because if I don't know that, then I'm not going to drink good water. And so there is something I think about when the knowledge that you're learning is directly impactful in your life and how that information can sit on you, rather than when it's just something that you need to do for someone else or something else, right? Like, the context in which you learn is really important. And so all the kids were homeschooled. And I think there's a lot to get into just the philosophy of people who kind of really feel against public schooling. A big thing that they had talked a lot about is, and we all, kind of feel this at some point, just like the prison aspect of schooling of, I tell you when you can stand up, I tell you when you can use the restroom, I tell you when you can eat, I tell you when you can talk, right? I mean, every aspect of your autonomy is taken away from you. And so looking at these kids who had never experienced that, it was very different to see them be kids. I realized how long it's been since I've seen kids be kids, not doing homework, not, just playing, just running and playing and learning about the worlds by falling and scratching themselves and, just doing things, right? I feel like the parents had such a good relationship where they were like, you're allowed to be free, but here are my boundaries that I don't want you to cross. So let's say they were being after they would eat, if they'd get really rambunctious and start yelling, especially the young one, she was like, I don't want you to yell in here, but you may go do what you want outside. And so the kid will go outside, run around, yell a little bit, and then he would be gassed and then no longer have the need to do that. But he still had a way to kind of express and manifest those feelings that he had. I think when you're in a school setting, there's so many things that you have to bottle. As a young boy, I can tell you the number of times I wanted to talk or run or do something dumb where you just have to be like, nope, because they won't allow me to talk. Or the amount you have to kind of limit yourself, I think, is terribly sad. And I know the difficulty from the teacher perspective, which is when you have 30 kids, how are you supposed to let them all yell and run? There has to be kind of a enormous change of how we even approach it to where that type of structure is not even needed for then students to be able to create chaos, healthy chaos. And so it was really cool to see kids who were homeschooled know as much as they did and have the zest for learning, that I was just like, wow, I had never met. I've met a few other people that were homeschooled, but much later in their life, like high school or middle school, but I had never met people who were homeschooled from day one. And it was just really interesting to see. I mean, their family and parents were so intelligent. They knew so much about history and technology, and they have a passion for learning as well. And so you could definitely see how that carried over to their children. I think, there is something very important to say. What ends up happening when children have the freedom to learn what they want to and when they want, right? When they feel tired, they don't. When they aren't tired, they do. It was cool to see they barely watch TV. They don't have any, they have a tiny little like pad that it's like I guess I just learned about it. It's not an iPad or anything, but it's just a pad. And they, would watch maybe 30 minutes or so a day. But apart from that, they're outside all day. And the amount of learning that happens when you're just in the world is absurd. And it's something that I want to keep touching back on, because it's like, I think we have to really separate learning and schooling, education and schooling, because I think when we combine the two, we start to falsely tell ourselves that learning can only happen within the confines and the walls of a school. And so, yeah, I thought it was awesome to see the actual literal education of the children and how much control the parents had, and how open it was to learning what they wanted to learn. If one day they wanted to do pottery for like a week, go ahead, do pottery. If another week you got super fascinated by Legos and you wanted to build something, go ahead, do that. The main focus was on learning. It wasn't on how to learn or what to learn, right? I think that's, again, even as I'm saying that, I'm like, that's so important. A person needs to know how to choose what they want to learn. So long as you're always told what you want to learn, there are students that I'll be like, so what is it that you want to kind of, what is something we want to do? Not what job do you want to get or what major do you want to do, but what is it that you care about? So many students can't answer that question. And they often tell me, like, I've never been asked that. I don't know what to say. But if you ask these kids, what is it that you want to learn or what is it you care about? They have answers. And they're not going to say a profession. Like, they will say specific, I really like X or I really like Y. And then you can actually just go and explore that. So I had really fun, and, I did a little bit of teaching, and that was really exciting. But overall, I think I'm excited to kind of get into homeschooling separately in its own season, because there's so much that I have to learn about it. The third and final point that I wanted to make about this experience, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, is minimalism and the educational values of minimalism. And I think, and I'm excited to get into this, because I think a lot of what I re-experienced again here were things that helped me find minimalism when I was a lot younger to begin with. So growing up in the Bay, and, for the last month or two, I've been around, I was at my really good friend's wedding, and he's a psychiatrist, and all his friends are doctors. And, my friends growing up are all engineers, and they're all very accomplished people in their own fields and careers in their 20s and 30s. And something that I think growing up in the Bay has always made me feel is very inadequate, not in the sense that I'm not capable, but in the sense of like people keep getting more and more and more. So I went to this wedding, and it was an amazing wedding and so beautiful and extravagant. And then I was on my friend's Instagram, and I saw another person that we both knew's wedding who had it in Portugal out of like a castle. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, all of a sudden you see something more, and then you start feeling like what you have is less. I had the same experience. I loved the home that I was staying at in San Francisco. I went to another person's house, and, their house or apartment overlooked the entire Niner stadium. And then all of a sudden, when I came back to my home, I was like, whoa, this doesn't feel the same anymore. And so what ends up happening is the higher and higher you see the bar ahead of you in terms of, like, I guess you can call it quality of things. I wouldn't say quality of life, but quality of things. I think sometimes it can have this impact where you definitely look at the things that you have as a lot less. And that's never helpful. It's never helpful. It might be helpful in making you discontent, so you do more, so you work harder, and you get more done to get to that level. In that way, that's pretty positive. But it definitely makes you look at what you have as if it's not good enough, even when earlier you may have loved what you had. But there's also a difference when you see in the other direction. When you see people Because I think the fear that a lot of capitalism is based on is that if you don't have these nice things, you're going to lead a terrible life. And people are so clinging on to that fear that they're willing to do so much to get like the new couch in IKEA or, whatever, just to be like, it's slightly better. But now I'm justified in all the work that I do that now my life is not terrible. But what ends up happening is when you look at people who have less than, materialistically less than what you have, and are still able to be as, more peaceful and more, content and happy with the things. I'm not saying it's the less things that make them happy. What I'm saying is it's their relationship with their work, and it's the way that they spend their time that may actually just impact them in such a way where they're not able to make so much money to have the things. But what I'm trying to highlight is that it's very evident then that it's not the things that makes the difference. In all that what I have seen, I feel like, is it almost always seems to be the strength of your connections, the connection that you have with your work and with the land around you. It's the connections. It's not the things themselves. It's always your relationship to the things that makes a life rich or full, more than it is the things. One person can have a Rolex watch and be like, I have 10 of these, I don't really care. And another person can have, I don't really know brands of watches, but you could have another one but feel like this watch means everything to me. And that relationship then makes your life rich or wealthy. And I think minimalism, one of the most beautiful parts about it, is that it simplifies the materials around you to such a level that you get to see them purely for what they are, which are things, they're tools that are meant to do something for you. Once you're able to identify that, you can kind of separate yourself from the social world that things exist and just look at them through like the utility aspect of things. So like a Nike shoe, the utility of it is that it's a shoe that helps you walk. And then perhaps if you're a creative, it's a shoe that helps you express yourself. And but then there's a whole social world that exists around brands. What it means to wear Nike. What does it mean to someone else? What does it mean to you to wear Nike, right? I mean, there's so many aspects of the idea of the thing that often like brings the value rather than the actual utility of something. And so like connecting this back to education, I think it's again asking those main questions, which is, okay, when we strip education down to its bare minimums, let's not think about the prestige of going to Harvard. Let's not think about the glamour of getting a 4.0 or being valedictorian. Let's just think about the bare minimum. What is learning? What am I trying to do here? Then all of a sudden you can pick and choose what things you want to study, what you don't want to study, where you want to put your effort, where you don't want to put your effort. You no longer are in the social game of things. And so in the same way there's social games of materials things, there's also a social world of education. And I think oftentimes people are so lost in the social world that you forget that education is this insanely important thing of how a person navigates the world, of their confidence, of their ability to express and articulate themselves, and so on and so forth. I just think minimalism helps you kind of strip away the excess and really see what's remaining. So I think going to a farm, especially a off-the-grid farm, really helps you realize, dang, the world that I was navigating a few weeks ago where I felt like I didn't have anything, all of a sudden no longer exists. I'm now realizing how much I do have, how much abundance I already have in my life. And I think that perspective shift can really change how someone interacts with education. You start learning no longer because you feel less than, but you start learning because you feel like you have enough and there's time to learn and you love learning, and the relationship changes completely. So I think this concept of minimalism, which in general is another really interesting thing, which is like the connection of these more like spiritual kind of beliefs and understanding of the world and how they intersect with education. So, what can Buddhism or what can Christianity or Hinduism or Islam, what can they teach us and how do they intersect with education? That's something I'm also really fascinated to do a whole season on. I think it'd be really interesting to just do like 5 episodes for each religion to just explore their own understandings of education and how their principles and kind of the values intersect with learning. But overall, I would really highly recommend anyone who has the privilege and time and resources to go woofing for some time, even if it's for 2 weeks or a weekend even, to give it a try. I'm really excited to continue doing that. in many places around the world to, continue to keep challenging myself and get out of my comfort zone and to understand new perspectives and really understand, how these processes work. Thank you all for listening. And I'm really excited for the next few weeks. I'm in Joshua Tree right now, but I'm really excited to be in Kansas with my best friend. He's doing his PhD in Kansas University, so I'm really excited to be back on the campus. It's been a while since I was at Georgetown, and so just to be back in that college environment, I'm really excited. But yeah, I'll keep you all up to date. I wish you guys the best of luck with everything you have going on. Thank you for listening, and as per usual, stay re-educated.